Have you ever wondered how one person can completely transform the entire landscape of American politics? Well, the answer isn't just about winning elections or passing laws. Instead, what we're looking at is a systematic dismantling and reconstruction of how politics works in this country, and it all centers around one figure who changed everything we thought we knew about democracy in America. So, in this video, I'm going to reveal exactly how Donald Trump didn't just win the presidency twice, but fundamentally altered the DNA of American political culture in ways that will last for generations. This isn't about whether you love him or hate him. This is about understanding the seismic shifts that have reshaped our entire system, and trust me, the scope of these changes will blow your mind. But first, let me give you an example so you understand just how dramatic this transformation has been. Think back to politics in 2015. Republicans were the party of free trade, strong international alliances, and institutional respect. Democrats and Republicans could disagree without viewing each other as existential threats. Political families could have dinner conversations without screaming matches. That world is gone, and it's never coming back. What I'm about to show you is how Trump created a political earthquake that didn't just change election outcomes, but rewrote the fundamental rules of how American democracy operates. We're talking about changes so profound that political scientists are literally redefining what American politics means. The data is staggering, the implications are massive, and by the end of this series, you'll understand exactly how we got here and what it means for the future. Now, here's the thing that most people completely miss about Trump's impact on American politics. Everyone focuses on the tweets, the rallies, the controversies. But that's just the surface-level noise. The real transformation happened at a much deeper, structural level that most Americans don't even realize has occurred. Picture this scenario. You're living through the most dramatic political realignment in American history, and most people think it's just about one loud guy on social media. The reality is that Trump engineered the complete capture and transformation of an entire political party, created a parallel political ecosystem that operates independently of traditional institutions, and normalized political behaviors that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. The numbers tell the story better than any opinion could. In 2015, about 30% of Republicans said America should stay out of world affairs. By 2023, that number jumped to 53%. We're witnessing a complete ideological flip that happened in less than a decade, but that's just one data point in a much larger pattern of transformation. Here's what actually happened. Trump didn't just win the Republican Party, he consumed it entirely. The GOP today bears virtually no resemblance to the party that existed when he first announced his candidacy. We're talking about a complete institutional takeover that political scientists call conversion, replacement, and consolidation. Conversion means that existing Republican officials either embraced Trumpism or faced political extinction. Replacement involved systematically removing anyone who refused to fall in line. Consolidation created a unified movement where loyalty to Trump became the defining characteristic of Republican identity. Think about the scale of this transformation. Liz Cheney, the daughter of a former vice president and a rising star in Republican leadership, was completely cast out of the party for refusing to embrace Trump's claims about the 2020 election. Mitt Romney, the party's presidential nominee just over a decade ago, chose not to seek re-election rather than navigate the new political reality. This wasn't gradual evolution, this was systematic purging. But the Republican Party transformation is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Trump fundamentally changed how Americans relate to politics itself. Politics used to be something most people thought about during election years. Now, it's become central to personal identity, family relationships, and social interactions in ways that would have been unimaginable before. The data on this is absolutely mind-blowing. 61% of Americans now say that talking politics with people they disagree with is stressful and frustrating. We've moved from a country where political differences were seen as normal, democratic disagreement to one where political opponents are viewed as enemies of the state. This shift represents what political scientists call effective polarization. It's not that Americans are more ideologically different than they used to be. Research shows that on many issues, Americans aren't as far apart as we think. But emotionally, we've never been more divided. Republicans and Democrats don't just disagree with each other, they genuinely dislike each other in ways that make compromise nearly impossible. The MAGA movement represents something unprecedented in modern American politics. This isn't just a political campaign, or even a traditional political movement. It's a complete parallel ecosystem that operates independently of traditional Republican structures and has grown far beyond what anyone initially imagined. The numbers are staggering. 36% of all registered voters now identify as MAGA supporters. That includes 71% of Republicans. This represents massive growth from just a few years ago when MAGA identification was much lower. We're looking at a political movement that has consolidated not just Republican voters, but created a new political identity that transcends traditional party lines. What makes this even more remarkable is how this movement has embedded itself into every level of American political infrastructure. State and local Republican parties, legislative branches, even judicial appointments have all been aligned with MAGA principles. This isn't just about Trump as an individual. This is about creating institutional changes that will persist long after he's gone from the political scene. The infrastructure that supports this movement is unlike anything we've seen in modern American politics. There are parallel media ecosystems, fundraising networks, and organizing structures that operate completely independently of traditional Republican institutions. This creates a self-reinforcing system where MAGA supporters consume MAGA media, donate to MAGA causes, and participate in MAGA political activities. Trump's assault on democratic norms represents perhaps the most significant aspect of his political transformation. Every president before Trump operated within certain understood boundaries of presidential behavior. These weren't necessarily laws, but they were traditions and expectations that had governed American politics for generations. Trump systematically violated these norms in ways that fundamentally changed what Americans expect from their political leaders. He refused to release his tax returns, something every president had done for decades. He attacked his political opponents and called for their prosecution, breaking long-standing traditions about gracious winning and democratic competition. He fired the FBI director to impede an investigation, something that would have been considered a constitutional crisis under any previous president. But here's the crucial point that most people miss. These norm violations weren't random or impulsive. They were systematic and strategic. Each violation pushed the boundaries of acceptable presidential behavior a little further, gradually normalizing conduct that would have been shocking just years earlier. The result is that American politics now operates under completely different rules than it did before Trump. Political opponents are no longer fellow Americans with different viewpoints. They're enemies to be defeated by any means necessary. Institutional independence is no longer respected when institutions produce outcomes that political leaders don't like. The peaceful transfer of power is no longer automatic when election results are disputed. January 6th represents the logical culmination of this norm erosion. When a sitting president encourages supporters to march on the Capitol to prevent the certification of an election he lost, we've moved far beyond normal democratic disagreement into territory that threatens the fundamental structure of American democracy. The attack on the Capitol wasn't just a riot or a protest that got out of hand. According to the bipartisan House committee that investigated the event, it was the culmination of a systematic plan to overturn a legitimate election. 5 people died. Hundreds of police officers were injured, and millions of dollars in damage was done to the symbol of American democracy. But what happened after January 6th reveals something even more disturbing about how American politics has changed. Instead of condemning the attack and moving to restore democratic norms, the Republican Party largely normalized the event. Rather than treating it as a fundamental assault on American democracy, party leaders minimized its significance and continued to embrace the narrative that led to the violence in the first place. This normalization represents a complete break from how American political parties have historically responded to threats to democratic institutions. When political violence occurred in the past, both parties typically united to condemn it and reaffirm their commitment to peaceful democratic processes. That didn't happen after January 6th, and that tells us everything we need to know about how fundamentally politics has changed. The aftermath also revealed how Trump's influence extends far beyond his personal political career. Even when faced with clear evidence of how his rhetoric and actions led to violence against democratic institutions, the party he transformed doubled down rather than pulling back. This demonstrates that the changes Trump brought to American politics have become self-sustaining and will persist regardless of his individual political future. Trump's expansion of executive power represents another fundamental shift that has permanently altered the American political system. Previous presidents, regardless of party, generally operated within understood constitutional limits and respected the separation of powers that defines American government. Trump systematically pushed those boundaries in ways that concentrated unprecedented authority in the presidency. The numbers on this are absolutely staggering. In his first 100 days back in office, Trump signed a historically low number of bills while setting records for executive actions. He exceeded even Franklin Roosevelt's pace of executive orders, and Roosevelt was dealing with the Great Depression. This represents a fundamental shift toward governing through executive power rather than working with Congress to pass legislation. But it's not just the volume of executive actions that matters, it's the scope. Trump has federalized the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, deployed the National Guard for routine law enforcement, and used emergency powers to implement tariffs that effectively function as taxes on American consumers. Each of these actions represents an expansion of presidential authority that previous presidents would have considered beyond their constitutional role. The tariff issue is particularly revealing because it shows how Trump has neutered Congress on one of its core constitutional responsibilities. The Constitution explicitly gives Congress the power to regulate commerce and impose taxes, but Trump has used emergency authorities to essentially run trade policy as a one-man operation. The courts are still sorting through whether this exceeds constitutional limits, but the damage to institutional balance has already been done. Trump's open admiration for authoritarian leaders around the world isn't just rhetorical flourish. It reflects a genuine shift in how he approaches presidential power. When he says he has the right to do whatever he wants as president under Article 2, he's articulating a view of executive authority that breaks fundamentally with American constitutional tradition. Political scientists who study democratic institutions are genuinely alarmed by these developments. Surveys of experts show that they believe American democracy is moving rapidly away from liberal democratic norms toward some form of authoritarianism. The ratings they give to American democratic health have plummeted since Trump's return to office, representing the fastest decline in democratic quality that these experts have ever recorded. This isn't partisan opinion. This is systematic analysis from scholars who study democratic breakdown around the world. They're applying the same metrics they use to evaluate democratic health in other countries, and the results show that America is following patterns that have led to authoritarian consolidation elsewhere. The weaponization of government institutions represents perhaps the most dangerous aspect of this transformation. When political leaders use law enforcement, regulatory agencies, and other government institutions to target their opponents, it fundamentally changes the nature of political competition. Instead of competing for votes through policy proposals and democratic persuasion, politics becomes about using state power to eliminate opposition. Trump has made no secret of his intention to use government institutions against his political opponents. He's called for prosecuting his rivals, investigating journalists who criticize him, and using federal agencies to punish states and localities that don't implement his preferred policies. This represents a complete break from the American tradition of keeping law enforcement and politics separate. The long-term implications of these changes extend far beyond Trump's individual presidency. When democratic norms are broken and institutional independence is compromised, it creates precedents that future leaders can exploit. Each violation of democratic tradition makes the next violation easier to justify and implement. We're seeing this dynamic play out in real time as Trump's approach to presidential power becomes the new baseline for what's considered acceptable. Future presidents from both parties will inherit this expanded view of executive authority, and there's no mechanism to automatically restore the previous balance once it's been disrupted. The structural changes Trump has implemented are designed to be sticky, meaning they're difficult for future administrations to undo. When political reforms embed mechanisms that reinforce a specific trajectory, they create path dependency that shapes political development for decades. This is exactly what we're seeing with Trump's institutional changes. American political culture has been so profoundly altered that it now resists a return to evidence-based governance and institutional respect. The changes go beyond policy preferences to fundamental questions about how democratic competition should work, what role institutions should play, and whether political opponents deserve basic respect and protection. The Constitution alone cannot save American democracy from this transformation. Constitutional protections are only as strong as the political culture that supports them, and that culture has been fundamentally altered. When large portions of the political system no longer accept constitutional limits on their power, the document itself becomes insufficient to maintain democratic governance. Political scientists now describe America as being on the cusp of competitive authoritarianism, a system where democratic institutions exist but are manipulated to ensure that one party maintains permanent control. This isn't the dramatic overthrow of democracy that we see in military coups. It's the gradual erosion of democratic competition through legal and institutional manipulation and institutional manipulation. The evidence for this transformation is everywhere once you know what to look for. State legislatures across the country have passed hundreds of laws that make voting more difficult, particularly in communities that traditionally support Democratic candidates. These aren't random policy changes. They're coordinated efforts to reshape the electorate in ways that favor one political party over another. But what makes this particularly insidious is how these changes are implemented through seemingly legitimate legal processes. Instead of openly declaring that they want to prevent certain people from voting, political leaders craft technical requirements and procedural barriers that achieve the same goal while maintaining plausible deniability. This is exactly how competitive authoritarian systems operate around the world. The manipulation extends far beyond voting laws into the basic infrastructure of how elections are conducted. Election officials who refused to overturn legitimate results have been replaced with partisan loyalists who have openly stated their willingness to change outcomes they don't like. The people who count votes and certify results are no longer neutral administrators. They're political operatives with predetermined agenda. This represents a complete inversion of how American elections have traditionally functioned. The whole system used to be built on the assumption that election officials would prioritize accuracy and legitimacy over partisan advantage. When that assumption breaks down, the entire foundation of democratic competition collapses. Meanwhile, the parallel media ecosystem that supports this transformation has become increasingly sophisticated and influential. Traditional journalism operated under professional standards that emphasized accuracy and accountability, even when reporters had personal, political preferences. The new media landscape rewards partisan loyalty and emotional engagement over factual reporting. This creates an information environment where different groups of Americans are literally living in different realities. They're not just disagreeing about policy solutions. They're disagreeing about basic facts regarding what's actually happening in the country. When people can't agree on shared factual foundations, democratic deliberation becomes impossible. The psychological manipulation techniques being deployed are remarkably effective at maintaining group loyalty and preventing defection. Trump's rhetoric consistently portrays his supporters as victims of persecution, while positioning himself as their protector and savior. This creates powerful emotional bonds that transcend normal political allegiances. Social media algorithms amplify this dynamic by creating echo chambers where people primarily encounter information that confirms their existing beliefs. The platforms profit from engagement, and nothing drives engagement like outrage and tribal conflict. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where political polarization becomes increasingly extreme and resistant to factual correction. The economic dimensions of this transformation are equally significant but often overlooked. Trump's trade policies represent a fundamental break from decades of American economic strategy, but they're not based on traditional conservative or liberal economic theory. Instead, they're designed to reward political allies and punish political opponents regardless of economic efficiency or consumer welfare. This politicization of economic policy extends throughout the federal bureaucracy. Regulatory agencies that used to make decisions based on technical expertise and legal requirements now face pressure to consider political loyalty when implementing policies. Career civil servants who provide continuity and expertise across different administrations are being systematically replaced with political appointees who prioritize ideology over competence. The international implications of America's democratic decline are profound and far-reaching. For decades, the United States served as a global model for democratic governance and peaceful transitions of power. American diplomats could credibly promote democracy and human rights because their own system demonstrated these values in practice. That credibility has been severely damaged by recent events. When American political leaders openly question the legitimacy of their own elections and use violence to contest results they don't like, it becomes much harder to criticize similar behaviors in other countries. Authoritarian leaders around the world now point to American political dysfunction to justify their own attacks on democratic institutions. So, there you have it. We've just walked through the most comprehensive transformation of American politics in living memory. From the complete institutional capture of the Republican Party to the systematic erosion of democratic norms, from the rise of competitive authoritarianism to the creation of parallel information ecosystems, Trump hasn't just changed how politics works in America, he's fundamentally altered what American democracy means. These changes are sticky, they're structural, and they're designed to persist long after any individual politician leaves the scene. The question now isn't whether American politics has been permanently transformed. It's whether the democratic institutions we once took for granted can survive this transformation intact.